thank you all very much for coming out on Wednesday morning, to see my talk. I'm super excited to share this with you. This is a project that I'm very passionate about, and in particular, the journey that we've taken to get here has been something that has had great successes and great lessons learned along the way, and I can't wait to share both with all of you. Now, the first thing I need to clarify is I only had so many words to fit the title of the talk in, and the length of the name of our game is pretty long, and that took up a lot of the words. So the first thing I need to clarify is that there wasn't no specific game jam. This wasn't something that we all went to TO Jam and spent the 48 hours and came up with a thing and then pitched it to Ubisoft and turned it into a game or something. Rather, what we were trying to do was take inspiration from game jam techniques and game jam culture and find a path to adapt that and scale that to AAA game development and the conception of a new AAA IP. And a few months ago, I had the honor and privilege of announcing this IP to the world at E3, where I got to go up and share the fruits of our labor with everyone. And I couldn't be more proud of the work that the team has done to create this. And I can't wait for, we only gave a little snippet of what we're doing, and I can't wait for everyone to see more. This is an IP that has a lot of innovation throughout. And at the core of that is this completely modular peripheral where you're able to add on wings and weapons and parts and everything you add on is instantly recreated in the game, and it totally changes the way that you play. And so today I want to tell you about our journey and our story for how we got there, how we tried to reinvent brainstorming and a typical conception process to come up with the IP in the first place, how we had some stumbles along the way as we tried to grow and expand that process, and then how we had to regain our footing and re-find our balance to close out production and really bring everything back together. But first, I want to start with the fun and terrifying part of starting a new IP, which is the conception phase. And in order to tell this story, I've got to go way back to the beginning of the story, which is the ending of another story of Splinter Cell Blacklist. Splinter Cell Blacklist was the first project from the Ubisoft Toronto studio. And at the time, everyone at the studio had been working together to ship it. And I had joined Ubisoft Toronto during the production of Blacklist, and we worked through that and brought that to a close. And at the end of that project, as with many studios, people start splitting up and going onto separate things. And particularly at Toronto, we went from one project to lots of projects really quick. And since then, Toronto has done many very successful collaborations on Far Cry Primal, Far Cry 4, Far Cry 5, Watch Dogs 2, Assassin's Creed Unity, many of Ubisoft's biggest brands. But at the time, we also were given a chance to try something new and crazy. And I'm still not sure exactly how I lucked out and got this opportunity, but I was given the opportunity to take a very small group of people. And we were given this mandate, it looked like this, to basically come up with something new. And as far as mandates go, this one was really wide open. Explore innovative gameplay and next-gen hardware, which at the time meant Xbox One and PS4, with the goal of creating a mainstream concept for development. So, this is really a blank slate, and this kind of freedom is incredibly liberating and incredibly terrifying, because it is super challenging to know where to go, especially with very limited resources when you have, just this wide open space ahead of you. So we formed a little prototyping group that we called Tomcat. I don't know why. And it was 8 people to start. 2 artists, 2 programmers, 2 game designers, 1 animator, and a manager. And At this point, I need to give a huge shout out. At the time, we had 2 leads. So it was myself, I was the manager, and we had a lead designer named James Everett. And he and I really worked very closely together to come up with this process. So a huge shout out to him. He can't be here today, but we worked really closely together on this process. So we had this group of people, and these were a wonderful group of people who I thoroughly enjoyed working with. But to be fair, we were kind of the island of misfit toys. This was a group of people that, you know, when all of the project selection and things came up, and they were like, okay, do you want to work on, you know, the next big Far Cry thing, or, you know, the next Assassin's Creed, or whatever it was. These were the group of people that, you know, went dashing into the unknown and said, I want to do the thing that's called Tomcat, but otherwise we know nothing about. And so, you know, it's a group of people that participated in a lot of game jams. You know, were really attracted by coming up with brand new things and iterating on that. But it was also a group of people that really, you know, in many ways wanted to rebel against the standard structure and process and way that we do things and way that things happen. And so, you know, we wanted to just reinvent everything, tear up all the rules and do something crazy. So we looked at, you know, how we would traditionally go about coming up with a new IP as a starting point. So we'd say, okay, well, we get a bunch of people, 8 people, so we'll all get in a room, we'll brainstorm tons of ideas, we'll like put stuff up on the wall, and then we'll all, you know, try to pick, or you know, the leads will try to pick, and we'll say, this is the best idea, let's do that. We build a demo out of it, and we polish that up and bring that to Paris and pitch it. It'll be amazing, it'll be awesome, high five. But, you know, when we looked at this, and we looked at this process and the kind of initial expectation, we had 4 big problems that we saw that we didn't like about how this typical process works. The first, we all kind of hated brainstorming in a traditional sense. And one of the big problems that we have with brainstorming is this effect of, you know, the loudest people in the room and the loudest ideas resonating, not necessarily the best ideas. Typically, if you know, throw 10 people in a room and you say, okay, we're going to brainstorm this new thing, everyone gets talking, and you know, you immediately start filtering down to 3 or 4 voices that are dominating this conversation, and the ideas are mostly coming from them. And there's a lot of people that you know, have wonderful ideas that are going unheard because they're, you know, being spoken over, or they can't get their word in, or they're not comfortable, you know, jumping into that fray. The second problem is biased selection. I've got 2 young kids right now, and you know, with 2 young kids, there's always these events and holidays and things that roll around, and you know, you get a lot of these like best dad in the world things, and I think I'm a pretty good dad, but you know, statistically, best dad in the world is probably a stretch, and you know, we had similar worries with James and I, you know, in a leadership role, with our biases affecting this process. Where if we were going in and ideas are cropping up and people are throwing stuff on the wall, you know, we come from a very, you know, James and I both had kind of similar perspectives and similar interests, similar enough, you know, we came from similar backgrounds, and you know, looking at that, we were really worried that this wasn't necessarily going to be the idea that resonated with a wider audience. You know, the ideas that resonated to kind of 2 30-something white guys who grew up in Canada would give us a fairly limited perspective and a limited selection. The third problem sounded good on paper. Okay, big caveat, I do not want to insult any game designers out there. I love game designers. But I think the best game designers are kind of like the best batters in baseball, right? And when you write a pitch on paper, you write a design down, and you're like, okay, this is how this feature is going to work. It's going to be amazing. The best designers are probably batting at, you know, a 40% success rate of that idea actually translating into something that's really compelling and fun when you make it. And more often than not, you know, once you take that design that sounded great on paper and make it into a game and you spend the months developing that feature, you come back to it and you say, oh yeah, actually we have to change that, or it was kind of flawed, or didn't work exactly as we expected. And the fourth problem, which takes a little bit of explanation, is something called the secretary problem. Quick show of hands, does anyone know what this means? Does anyone know what this is? Navi knows. So the secretary problem is a mathematical problem with a kind of dated name. And the secretary problem speaks to the challenge of how to select the best sample from a data set when you have to go through them linearly. So the idea is, this kind of fictional scenario is, you're trying to hire a secretary. Secretaries are all different quality. Some of them are great, some of them are bad. And when you interview them, you can assess the quality of that person. But for whatever reason in this fictional scenario, once you say no and reject that applicant, they're gone forever and you can never call them back. And so the challenge is, how many people do you interview before you take the next best one? Right? If you interview 2, 3 people, someone great comes along, and you're like, oh, they seem good, let's just hire them. How do you know that 3 people down the line, you wouldn't have someone much better? And so we were really worried about this with our brainstorming and conception process. We were brainstorming some ideas, some of them sounded cool. Maybe we'd even make a prototype and that would be cool, but how did we know that if we hadn't gone a couple more rounds, we wouldn't have come up with something much more compelling? So we had these 4 problems, and we looked at them and we were okay, let's, how are we going to address these? How are we going to change our process to try to mitigate this as best as we could? So what we decided to do, 1, we wanted to rethink the typical brainstorming process, and I'll go through that in more detail in a second. Second, we wanted to make it completely democratic and fair in order to use our tiny team both as the idea generation and development, but also as our smallest and easiest validation of the ideas. We would have people vote on the best ideas and make it a completely fair and democratic process. Third, we'd prototype as many things as possible in order to validate that what was sounded fun on paper actually was a compelling idea. We would rapidly prototype as many things as possible to validate their success. And fourth, once we had those prototypes, once we had that, no matter how compelling they were, we would put it aside, success or failure, and completely restart from scratch with a new batch of ideas. And we would do that for a period of time that we kind of figured out based on our schedule. And at the end of that, we'd look back over everything and say, okay, out of all this time, what were the ideas? What were the best ideas that we came up with during that period? So once we had those solutions, we split this into a plan. We had a 2-week schedule where we would brainstorm, pitch, vote, plan, and then the second week we'd prototype. And then rinse, repeat, go right back to the beginning. And the first chunk of that is brainstorming. So for us, we had this challenge. Okay, how do we reinvent? How do we do a better job with brainstorming? The first problem we had was this wide open mandate. How the heck are we going to ask people to brainstorm? We're like, okay, group of people, go away, just come up with anything. I don't know, what are you into? You into RPGs, MMOs, just throw some ideas out there because our mandate could be anything. So we had to give some focus to that. We had to get some clarity as to where people should focus their brainstorming. What problem were they trying to solve? And so, we worked on this idea of a guiding question. It had to be an open-ended question. We didn't want to force people into a corner, but we wanted this kind of open-ended guiding question that could help clarify and give them a direction to go in. So some examples of these questions. What game would you create where the primary mechanic is collaboration? What E for Everyone game would you create with 10,000 simultaneous AI or human characters? What exploration-based game could only be accomplished on a living room console with a peripheral? And there was a number of these different ideas and different questions that we put out there. One of my personal favorites that I didn't put up here was what's a game that could evoke a sense of discovery and wonder? What would be a primary mechanic that could evoke a sense of discovery and wonder in players? So once we had these questions, we had to set about brainstorming those. And the first thing that we did to combat this problem of the loudest person in the room was we scaled the brainstorming way down to the smallest it could be with one person. We'd start the first day of the week, this is Monday, we've got the question out, first thing, and everyone goes off alone to think about that question and to brainstorm on their own. And they could do a little bit of research, check things out, but they had the whole morning of the first day, and we tasked everyone with writing down 25 compelling game ideas based on that question. And this doesn't sound too difficult, right? 25 is not that big of a number. I assure you, if you try to go through the exercise, it's much more challenging than you would think. You tend to get through 10, 15 ideas, you're like, yeah, this is easy, I am laughing, this is awesome. And then you get up to like 16, 17, you're like, okay, these are a bit of a stretch. And you know, by the time you're at like 21, 22, 23, you hit 25, and you are like, that is it. This is the sum total of all possible human creativity about this subject. There are no other ideas imaginable that could answer this question. I've got them all. I am tapped out. And when people hit that point, we pair them up. And all of a sudden, you meet someone else from your team who's also done the same exercise, coming up with 25 ideas. And lo and behold, somehow, they've come up with a completely different set of 25 than you have. Oh, they saw this problem from a totally different perspective. They were coming at this from a different angle. I didn't even think of interpreting it like that. And so these two people would meet up, they'd share their ideas, they discuss their ideas. And the remarkable thing is that now both people are invigorated. They are suddenly seeing a different perspective that they never even thought of approaching this problem from. And together as a pair, they're tasked with coming up with an additional 25 ideas, riffing off inspiration from each other, suddenly opening up entire new avenues of thought that neither of them considered, but once they saw the angle that each of them came from, it would open up this possibility. So by the end of the first day, each pair would have 75 ideas. Day 2, we do it again. We take the pairs, we pair them up. So now we have groups of 4. They share the 150 ideas that they came up with the previous day, and they start riffing, and as a group now they're coming up with another 25. Afternoon, now we bring everyone in. And we literally have hundreds of ideas. When any individual couldn't possibly think of more than 25, now the whole team is empowered with a set of hundreds of ideas answering this open-ended question from which they can draw from. And then the last step is to scale all the way back down, right back down to single solo work, where each individual had 2 full days to take those hundreds of ideas, to take all of that huge possibility space and condense that down into 3 pitches, 3 slides each, 5 minutes each, that were, fleshing some of those ideas out into something that they thought was a compelling and cohesive game pitch. So they distill all of that info down, and the end of day Thursday, we'd get everyone together in a room, and it was very fun. We had kind of a pitch day, and everyone had their 5 minutes to go up, or 5 minutes per, to go up and present their pitches, present their ideas. And it was amazing seeing, even the ideas that you had seen in very early stages at a brainstorming level, once people had really put thought in and attached images and kind of put some work in to put that into a cohesive and fleshed out pitch, it was absolutely incredible seeing these just dozens and dozens of amazing game pitches come together. And I still think there are a treasure trove, going back through our old files of so many games that I would love to make at some point in the future. Incredibly creative and diverse ideas that we would never have gotten through a traditional process. Once we had these pitches, everyone voted. We did this very simply. We just gave everyone 3 little sticky things, and everyone went up and voted. As people were pitching, we'd write them down on the board, and people could go up and vote on the ones that they wanted. Now, one improvement to this, this process is actually being taken and replicated over at Magic Leap in New Zealand, where James Everett, who was the original designer, has gone to, the lead designer. And one of the improvements that they made, one of the iterations that they made on this process was to make the votes silent because you get some pattern of people looking at what other people are voting on and steering that. We didn't do that when we did it originally, and I think it worked well, but it may have just been the way that our group was structured and that we were going up. So everyone would vote, and after we'd voted, we'd have 3 top voted pitches. Now, many times these 3 top voted pitches actually came from 4 or 5 pitches. It's really strange the way that kind of zeitgeist works. That people have the same set of raw ideas that they're drawing from, and sometimes you get pitches that we're going in a similar direction. So rather than say like, oh, this one got slightly more votes, we'd say those 2 pitches were pretty much along the same lines. Let's merge them. Let's combine the cool elements of both and turn that into one thing. But essentially, we'd boil it down to 3 winning pitches each time. And from there, everyone would submit their preferences of like, hey, I'd love to work on prototyping this pitch or that pitch in order. And we'd look, and it was a very small team, so we had to just make some decisions and break it up. And each person would end up joining a small group of 2, 3 people as we grew, maybe 3, 4, 5 people to work on a prototype. And we made 3 prototypes in a week, every 2 weeks. So we'd have one day, the Friday of that week, to break into those groups, sit down, start talking, talking about how the heck in a week can we possibly prototype. These were big game ideas. These were like not a mini game. These were pitches for something that could be a AAA game. And so, in a week, how do you boil down to the essence of that idea? And how do you validate that in the most efficient manner possible? And there is never any extra time. Literally, there is only a week. That's it. That's what you have to do. So people would kind of come up with a plan. And then in the afternoon, we'd run those plans by the other groups, get some feedback, get some validation. Often you'd have suggestions for, hey, maybe you could use this technology. Maybe there's this tool you could use. Did you know that this was out there? That would be helpful. And then we had a week to validate by any means necessary. We used different engines. We used different tech that was available. We made paper prototypes or acted things out or did anything we possibly could to prove this out. And again, this was a wonderful process. It was a mad dash. It was very intense for a week making all of these games. And this resulted in all sorts of wild and wacky prototypes across all sorts of different technologies and genres and things, and lots of crazy stuff. AR and mobile things and whatever. I don't even know what was going on here. I'm sure it was a ton of fun. And these photos were from something, I mostly put them in just to embarrass these people that they were in my GDC presentation. Yeah, these games were amazing, I'm sure. Anyways, we came up with all sorts of crazy prototypes. One of those prototypes was actually really cool, and I'll show you a quick video of it. It was a game where it was used to Kinect, and you could kind of make these silhouette paintings with your body and capture them, and it was kind of a Pictionary kind of thing, right? People would guess. And this was something that we didn't think, okay, maybe this isn't something we're going to turn into a big AAA game. But we actually had a chance to show it to the world. There's an all-night festival called Nuit Blanche in Toronto. And so we went and projected it up on the side of a 7-story building and had everyone come out and play it. So it was super cool. After we did all this prototyping, we'd all get together, big group, play all these games, have a ton of fun, and give this really open and honest feedback on what worked, what didn't. And the power of this feeling of fairness, because it was this democratic process. Everyone had been voting. There wasn't one idea selected because the lead said, this is the one we're going to go, this is the direction I want to go in. Everyone felt like it was a fair playing field where each of them had contributed to that. And that had an incredible effect on people's willingness to step up, give their honest thoughts on what was working, what they were excited about, what fell through. And I think this is something that you actually see a lot in game jam culture as well. This incredibly open and transparent and honest feedback and assessment. I think it's a really positive part of that community that oftentimes we miss out, and we get a little bit wrapped up in politics and power politics in larger development. After all that, we went for a while. We had dozens of prototypes, and we reached that point where we're like, okay, we really need to decide what we're going to do. And so we took a step back and we looked through. Keeping in mind that secretary problem, we had really given it a good run. We had a bunch of stuff that we could select from. And we looked back, and out of everything, one prototype really stood out. It looked like this. Had humble origins. It was a Wiimote kind of taped to a consumer electronics board with building blocks and copper wire stuck to it. But it worked, and we made a demo. You could fly around in space and grab asteroids and do neat things. And it was a very rudimentary prototype. You had to be careful not to make it fall apart as you were playing with it. But we started to show it to some people, and it was really, really cool. They'd come and play it, and people started filling in all of the missing parts. I didn't play that video with audio, but people started coming and, adding in, they'd make their own sound effects, and they'd come and, and everything that wasn't there from this prototype that we had built in a week, people could imagine it, and they could see the potential. And we also started to meet a bunch of people from the studio who came up and said, hey, I could help make this a reality. I don't know if you know, but I have a background in X, people that had worked in industrial design. There's one guy in particular that we met named Vlad. And Vlad came up to me at the company barbecue, and he has a very kind of blunt way of speaking many times. And Vlad came up and basically said, you're doing this all wrong. This is horrible. I can fix it. And he said, I have to show you something. And so we went to see, and Vlad had built, scratch-built this custom drone with like head-tracked cameras and a crazy thing. And like this is scratch-built down to like his own chemically etched circuit boards and things. And he was like, I know how to do this. I know how to do this stuff. It's a shame the video that I had cut off there, this drone had like vertical takeoff and then would rotate and turn into an airfoil and fly like a jet, and it was just really cool. So Vlad came on board and started redoing everything that we had stumbled our way through for this prototype. And other people on the team started, all of these skill sets started coming out, people that worked with industrial design. And at the time, we had this idea of building a custom game controller for the thing. That's how we would interface with the toys and kind of a flight stick idea. And so we started working, and this was the next prototype that we had built. So, still pretty rudimentary. It was heavy, it was big, it was clunky. But it was a major step up from our kind of building block and copper wire thing. It was much sturdier. It used micro USB connectors to connect everything, which USB-C just can't come fast enough. I absolutely despise those connectors. But they worked, and they got the data across, and the thing, you could play it. And, we knew who we were making this game for, and I'll never forget the moment that we brought in the first group of kids, and we gave them this thing to play with, and just, the looks on their faces, their eyes lit up, their jaws dropped. And this was a rough, this was a very rudimentary prototype. It was heavy, it was clunky, but you could just see this magic that it was something that they absolutely fell in love with. And so we knew we were onto something special, and we took this game and we brought it to the Ubisoft's HQ in Paris, and we presented it. And it went super well. And we're really happy. The pitch went well. They were excited. And we showed a little bit of all of these crazy prototypes and things we'd built. But we got a green light, and so that moves us into the next phase of our story, which is pre-production. So coming back from our successful pitch, we were feeling great. We started to grow the team, expand the team, bring people on, and we were feeling amazing, on top of the world. We were like, this is it. We're kicking ass. We threw out all of the old process. We did this crazy new experiment. It was super successful. So we felt vindicated for trying to do things differently. And we were incredibly overambitious, super audacious. We were like, we're going to do everything. At this point, just, who thought we could do anything to do with hardware? This will be awesome. Just throw more crazy stuff on the pile. And but we still knew that we were a new team, we were a small team, and we needed to prove ourselves. So we set about making a vertical slice. We fully recognized that the little demo that we showed to kids, that was never something that could have shipped. It was, a hacky kind of little demo that made something work. So we set out to prove that we could do this for real. We could make a game and make a toy that looked and felt like something that could go to market. And so, filled with energy, filled with enthusiasm, we charged into this, and it started going pretty well. This is our next iteration. Those are the connectors. So we got rid of those horrible micro USB connectors, and we made these really neat connectors that would click together and they'd work, and have this really instantaneous connection to the game. And we made our first real toys. These are some of the early, the first version of real-looking toys that we made. We started to bring on some people from the toy industry that knew what they were doing. We started working with model shops and people that could, really make proper professional toy prototypes. And we made these toys. They looked really cool. They had problems. There's certainly usability things. I have gained an immense amount of respect for toy designers and the toy industry and everything that they do. And so, you'd move these toys and the wings, would kind of fall off because these connectors were great, but didn't really have anything that would latch or connect. And we built a demo. This was our first vertical slice demo. And, it was really coming together. It was something that was a big step forward from, the little prototypes that we had made. It was pretty neat. You'd start out in space, kind of take off from this mothership, and eventually launch. And then you'd arrive out in space, and there was kind of these different levels that you could select down on the planet's surface, these different linear levels. And you could look at one of these gates and say, like, oh, I want to do that. And then you'd transition down to the surface. There was a loading sequence, and you'd engage on whatever mission it was. So in this example, it was a race. And you'd go and start engaging that. It was pretty cool. And everything that you do on the toy would be instantly recreated, and you could add on these weapons or boosters or things that could change the gameplay. And so we made this demo. We were feeling great. We're like on top of the world, kicking ass. We bring it back, and we're like, okay, here's where we're at. This is our vertical slice. It's awesome. And that's when we realized, okay, this is starting to get real. Like, we're playing in a bit of a different league. There's real money on the table. This is, we're building a bigger team here. The stakes are a lot higher, and the expectations are a lot higher. It's no longer good enough just to have, something that's a cool idea, a compelling demo. And, we start hearing all of this feedback of like, really? You guys making a custom controller? Like, do you know how long Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo spend on making a controller? Like, that's a pretty big endeavor. And, the engine that you're working with, I'm not sure you're going to ship with that. And the game structure and player engagement and, play time and world logic and all these things that you need to figure out for building a new IP, really real, valid things that we were just kind of rushing through with vim and vigor. But in addition to all of these external things, we started having these voices cropping up within our team. Saying, hey, guys, I think maybe we should take a step back and kind of plan this out properly and figure out what our scope is. And this process is cool, but it's a bit chaotic. Like, this is a bit seat of our pants, right? We should really document this, do all of this. And at this point, we had two paths ahead of us. We had a big choice. We could thoroughly document, scope it out, rigorous process, analyze requests. This is how, Ubisoft has proven these processes out. This is how we make games. People have figured this out. We've got Jira and Confluence, and yeah, we can really button this down. You have to remember that this group of people making this thing kind of all pulled together specifically to rebel against this kind of process, right? There's kind of a group of people that were specifically like, to us this was the boring and slow, but maybe sensible, but boring and slow path that that we wanted to go away from. And so to us, we saw another choice. More innovation. No matter what challenge came up, we could always solve it with more innovation. And there's two guys that I wished I had paid more attention to in retrospect. Names are Abraham Maslow and Vilfredo Pareto. Does anyone know what Maslow is, what I'm referring to in this case? Hierarchy of needs. No, not the hierarchy of needs. He is very famous for the hierarchy of needs, but not that. Thank you for playing into my GDC presentation thing. Specifically, I am talking about Maslow's hammer, or the expression that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And Vilfredo Pareto is famous for the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. The principle that 20% of the effort will yield 80% of the results, and that final 80% or 20% of the results that you need actually comes from 80% of the effort. Because we had a hammer, and that hammer was more innovation. The whole process that we had created was effectively an innovation machine. And so no matter what feedback came up, no matter what challenge came up, we could innovate our way out of that problem. So, too expensive and difficult to create a custom game controller? No problem. We'll make a controller mount that interfaces directly with the extension port of all of the first-party controllers, allowing you to communicate, instantly through their hardware and leveraging all of that work in a way that no one's done before. More powerful tech? No problem. We'll take Ubisoft's latest and greatest engine, Snowdrop, and port everything over and, leverage that work with an engine that is amazingly powerful, but at the time hadn't really been fully proven out and was still being used on the Division. More freedom and autonomy? No problem. We'll create tech to allow you to seamlessly travel from space to planets, planets to space, circumnavigate around worlds in a completely open and seamless manner. More meaningful choices? No problem. We'll simulate every single AI on every single planet simultaneously, allowing the players to have real impact on the planets and allowing the enemy to fight back so that no two players will have the same story and everyone's game will go in a different direction. And we didn't stop there. No matter what came up, there was something new. We had crazy three-dimensional elemental propagation throughout the game. We had second screen experiences and planet creation at some point, ill-advised. We wanted to build laser tag into the toy. I still kind of miss this idea. It would have been really cool. But we were really going out there, and we made all of this stuff, and we took a step back, and we were like, okay, where are we at? It worked. These were cool prototypes. They were amazing ideas. And they worked. We had this team that could make these crazy innovations functional and prove them out quickly, and except for the other 80% of the work that it would have taken to actually make those features, right? We had quickly gotten them to these 80% states of yeah, that's cool, that works. And when we started to take a step back and look at it, we were like, oh no, we made a huge mistake. And I'm not quite sure how all of these separate pieces were supposed to fit together. Individually, they were all really neat innovations, but they weren't adding up to create a sum that was greater than a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. And so, I started to realize, okay, this process that was amazing for conception, that was incredibly effective during the conception phase, I don't know if this is scaling in the way that we hoped it would. And, while there were some of these features that were really groundbreaking and revolutionary and are still huge components of the game today, this controller mount right at your fingertips, instantly swapping out, and the seamless travel, and this incredible living world. So many more of the features, ended up having to be cut and cast aside. And, we wasted a lot of time and effort trying to innovate our way out of every problem, which we could have solved in a much better manner. And for me, this was really a moment stepping back, and it was kind of this shattering of the reality distortion field. Engineers at Apple used to speak about something they called the reality distortion field, where the charisma of Steve Jobs could convince people that the impossible was possible, and that no matter what problem they faced, even when you couldn't push the silicon to do that, he could will it to happen, and they would pull a group of people together and make it so. And honestly, in the early phases of this project, we felt like that. We felt like, okay, no matter what happens, we've got this process, it's working. We will just will it to make it so, make it happen. And it was when we stood back and looked at this and said, okay, we're never going to ship this. It's not going to come together. For me, this was really this kind of low point of reflection. And that brought us right into the beginning of production. With this question, how in the hell are we going to ship this? How are we going to make this, how are we going to fix this process? We had all of these incredibly powerful and compelling parts. How are we going to pull them together into a whole? A little voice. We can solve it with more innovation. We kind of realized, maybe not. Maybe that was, in fact, part of the problem that had gotten us into this situation. In Ed Catmull's excellent book, Creativity, Inc., he talks about the importance of balance and the importance of conflict between all of the departments in a creative enterprise to maintain that balance. And when we took a step back and looked, we realized that our development was, horribly unbalanced. And I want to clarify that this was not specific disciplines fighting against each other. This was not, game designers wanting innovation and programmers saying no. This was really guiding philosophies, and we had game designers pushing for, more scope control and bringing things down to a more elegant solution. We had programmers pushing for more innovation. These were these kind of competing philosophies, but what we realized was that the philosophy of innovation as solution was massively unbalanced and overweighted. And we had to take a step back, and some of those voices that had been there within our team earlier, we had to put things in place to empower those voices and listen to those voices. People in tech saying, okay, hey, it's great that we have these wonderful innovations, but we need to balance that out with safer solutions, with proven solutions in order to protect the innovations and make them really sing. People in production saying, hey, we can help make this scope more manageable. We can help address the timeline and adjust the timeline to make this a realistic endeavor. In business, saying, we can help validate this offer. We can help validate which parts of this are really resonating, really pinpoint the audience and their expectations. Every GDC talk has to have some sort of cheesy analogy, so this is mine. I think of this as trying to protect a spark, protect a flame, and grow it into a fire. And early on, too much process and too much innovation and too much structure can snuff that out, can really squander and kill ideas way too early. Again, in Creativity, Inc., he talks about protecting ugly babies, that often these early prototypes that you're making with a couple people in a couple days, they're rough. They're rough around the edges. And if people looked at them, they'd be easy to dissect and they'd be easy to pick apart. And you need to give that time and space and freedom to survive. But what we realized is as you grow, without the structure, without the protection of that structure starting to come on board, you're actually doing an immense disservice to these sparks. New flames will spark up and consume all the oxygen. Winds of change will come as things change in the industry or things change with people's behavior and start to snuff out things that were promising. And you have to start putting these walls, starting to put this structure in place, bit by bit, leading up to protect the innovations that you have. And that equilibrium point, that point of balance, is not always the same. It is not always that you want an even balance between all of these different departments. But that balance and that equilibrium point shifts over the course of production. And you need to carefully maintain that and nurture that to help that spark grow into the kind of roaring flame that you want it to be. And really for me, looking back, that's my key takeaway. In conception, we had a very unbalanced process, massively weighted towards innovation and protecting innovation and making that innovation as rapid and as effective as it could be. And it was incredibly effective. And I can't stress that enough. This is a process I would love to see other companies and other groups replicate because it was some of the most fulfilling game development experience I've ever had in my career, and many people on the team, I think, would attest to that. And we've already started to see some experiments replicating that elsewhere, and it's been incredibly effective. But moving into pre-production, we made the mistake of just trying to keep going and trying to scale that process up. And we should have still kept that balance on the side of innovation. It's still important to add that depth, but we had to start to tip the scales. We had to start to add some of that structure to make it work. And then moving into production, we had to find our new equilibrium point, our new balance point. And that's going to look different for everyone, the path to get there, and the path to adjust that new equilibrium. For us, it meant really creating the structure of having regular venues for healthy conflict, for venues where people could challenge. So we had creative briefs with a feature at an early level, so kind of a high-level presentation overview of that feature, bringing in all the stakeholders who could say, okay, I want to raise a flag about this. This is a warning. Then taking that into FSOs. This is a very Ubisoft-specific thing, but essentially a much, much more specific description of that feature, again, with a forum for challenge and debate, discussion. Our meetings, became very much about making sure that anyone could add points for discussion. They weren't just, top-down me saying, here's the agenda. We built the agenda collaboratively, and we made sure that there were venues for everyone to discuss and argue. And we encouraged that healthy conflict. On the production side, we really shifted focus to velocity to better understand how we were tracking towards our scope. We used playtest and external validation to understand our audience and what's resonating. And we really refocused in on our game pillars in order to use those as the razor to help prioritize and focus on what's important. And we realized that only through focusing on these things could we protect these things and actually make them flourish in the game. For us, those pillars were, of course, this modular toy, this instant connection, this magical moment that makes kids' eyes light up and their jaws drop. The creative combat that this instant swapping and connection empowers you to do in-game. This creative problem solving where you get into a challenge and there's no right or wrong answer, but you have to experiment and figure out how to adapt to take on that challenge. And this incredible living, dynamic world that makes it for no two players having the same story, no two players having the same journey. Now, we're still active in development, and I need to give a huge shout out to our team back in Toronto, who is still working very, very hard to bring everything completely together and wrap it up. I'm super, super excited about the game. I'm super excited for you all to see more about it over the coming months. I can't wait. So far, we've only given a little glimpse at E3, and I can't wait for people to see what we've been up to. And, I'd really stress two things. One, I would love to see other people take advantage of the lessons that we learned in that incredibly effective conception process and process that was inspired from game jam culture, from game jam processes that we adapted, and to keep an eye on that balance between structure and innovation in order to help get through all of those phases of production. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. Now, I think we've got time for a couple questions. First, I want to stress, please, 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 this is my first GDC presentation. And I would really, really love it and appreciate it if you would go, once you get the email, if you'd go and fill in the feedback form, because I would love the feedback, love your thoughts. Any questions? There are 2 microphones there and there.
Hi. So in the conception phase, you had this 2-week period that ended with 3 pitches.
Yep.
How many pitches did you actually end up making?
So the conception phase, you're asking me to do math. Okay, so first of all, the first week ended in 3 pitches per person. So that changed as our team scaled up. So pitch-wise, initially, I guess we were doing 24 pitches every 2 weeks. But our team started growing as we were expanding. So, by the time we got to our actual green light pitch, many, over 100 fleshed out, more than that, I don't know, 150, tons and tons and tons of game pitches. There's really like a treasure trove there. I'd love to go back to them. We built 3 prototypes every 2 weeks. So, that math should be a little bit easier. So, again, doing math. I think all in all, we probably had, I don't know, 15, 16 different prototypes. That's not divisible by 3, so it's almost not the real number, but somewhere in that ballpark.
Hi, thanks for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I'm wondering if during the process where you were pairing people up or putting them into the groups of 4, did it really matter what disciplines you paired together, or did you mix that up every time?
So this is one of the areas where James and I actually put some design and thought into that. We would make sure to rotate so that people weren't paired up with the same people. Obviously, we'd have a chance to go through. But we would try to pair people up where one of the things we were most conscious of was one person steering or dominating that conversation too much. So we would try to pair more introverted or quieter people together in some cases, especially early on in the project, and more extroverted, loud people together who could play off each other's energies. That changed over the course of our production because as everyone started prototyping together, working very close in these intense things, building, pitching, everyone became much more comfortable working with each other. And towards the end, we had to be far less concerned about that. And we were able to just rotate through people that hadn't worked together yet.
Thanks. And also, I noticed you had some AR pitches during the process.
Sure.
Was there ever an AR version of this game? You see the keyboard placement stuff?
That would be awesome. No, but it would be awesome.
Just a small logistical question, because I also make games that are designed for kids. How did you find the kids for playtesting? I've Googled this repeatedly, and I think the only result is I'm probably on some watch lists.
We work with a wonderful user research team at Ubisoft and at Ubisoft Toronto. So I feel quite lucky to have a bunch of experts that can help guide us through that. We've done a lot of playtesting with kids, and we continue to do regular playtesting with kids. I think it is wonderful to see really raw, unfiltered thoughts and reactions. Sometimes we ask people for scores on playtests of what do you think of the game, 1 to 5? And we found kids are useless at giving scores. They are wonderful to learn usability lessons. They're wonderful to, actually watch their reactions and see. But, we've had some playtests where, the build is broken and there's some horrible glitch and you just see this kid banging their head against a problem and not understanding it. Mm-hmm. And they look like they're gonna start crying. And then we're like, what do you think of the game? And they're like, 5 out of 5, it was amazing. And we're like, okay, you're just excited because you're coming to test a video game. Right. So you have to be a little skeptical and take any scores with a grain of salt. But I think there's immense value. There's always immense value in watching people from whatever target demo your game is targeting really play your game. It's a very, very humbling experience.
Cool, thanks.
With the amount of ideas that you were asking your team to come up with during the brainstorming phase, did you run into a lot of creative burnout? And if so, how did you manage that?
It's a great question. It's a really intense process. The mental drain that you get from, you are really pushing yourself to go to the end of whatever the heck, after a week of doing this and generating these pitches and giving these pitches, many people on our team, it was cross-discipline. Many people weren't that comfortable going up and presenting, and that was a draining process. The key for us was that weekend. The key for us, and that's a big part of why we split it up like that, was having that first week, super intense, all these ideas are coming out. You'd pitch on Thursday, which was good, because that gave you a bit more time. You'd pitch on Thursday, you'd come in on Friday, okay, pressure's off a little bit. You're not generating ideas. Now you're sitting with a team and you're trying to figure out how the heck can we prototype this. But that's more about people leveraging their experience, their skill set, saying, oh, I know how to do this, I could do that, I could, it's very fun, it's very engaging. But then having that weekend to just go, let things simmer in your head for a bit, calm down, and then be ready to go the next week with intense brainstorming. It's kind of like participating in a game jam, but you need those gaps, you need those breaks in between.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Knowing how well your small prototyping group worked, would you say there's still value in doing studio-wide game jams?
So we've also experimented with studio-wide game jams both at UB Toronto and other studios that I've been at. I think they are very, very fun. I think they're a great retention tool. I think they're something very motivating for employees. I think one of the challenges is they don't necessarily have the right venue to turn into something real, to turn into something that you can really leverage. There's companies that have done that really well. I know Bethesda, they tend to do game jams of how could you add a feature onto our existing game. But typically, the constraints of a game jam, where you're doing everything in a week or you're doing everything in 2 days, limits you to creating kind of little arcadey mini games, which are super fun, but isn't necessarily something that Ubisoft is going to be like, or big companies going to be like, yes, we're going to take that and publish it. Yeah. So what we were attempting to do was scale that up to something that it could be used really in a major conception of a game. I think that was really effective, and personally, I love the idea of maybe often you have downtime as people are ramping down from one project before they start another. That's a wonderful time to try something like this with the hope that it can actually turn into a commercial product that the company could do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. So 2 questions. The first one is about the 25 ideas. How deep are always the ideas? Is it just simple gameplay mechanics, or how do you really define? So
typically people were trying to make ideas that a game could be built around, so a little bit bigger. Not just like, oh, you could press A to do this, but more like, oh, you could build a game around this mechanic. That having been said, the ideas themselves were just, a sentence or 2 short descriptions at that level, and you're going through. So the description was very, very short, but the ideas were designed to be something that you could actually build a AAA game around.
Okay. And just the second one was, who decide the idea of the brainstorm of the 2 weeks? When you said, we will think about a game, I don't remember the example. Yes, where is the guided questions? Who decided?
Who decided on those questions?
Yes.
So that's one of the areas where we were less democratic as well. That was really just James and I, 2 leads on the project. We would sit together and kind of try to come up with some ideas and put that out to the group. Okay. Yeah. Thank you all so much. for coming and listening to my talk. Please rate it or give me the feedback or whatever the email asks you to do. Thank you.